to A Cup of Gratitude with Amanda Schaefer. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm so glad you stopped by. This podcast is really for anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's about taking a moment to slow down and look around and actually see all of the good things that are there. There's no question that asks, is your cup half empty or half full? But I think a better question is, what's in your cup? I mean, a drop of gratitude will benefit your life unimaginably more than a full cup of anything else. So let's settle in and take a look at how we can shift our focus and embrace the joy and the wonder of the life that we have. And once you start, you won't be able to stop seeing the good. And just like me, you won't be able to stop talking about it. And somehow that creates even more. Even in the midst of difficulty, even when it's really hard, learn how to drink from a cup of gratitude. Welcome. Today, we're going to be talking with Danielle Camasso. Danielle is a stay-at-home mom and maker who has a passion to minister and connect with moms. Welcome, Danielle.
Hi.
So glad you could join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you went to college for and received an arts degree. So how have you been able to use that over the years?
So for the most part, I use it in my personal life, mostly like, making things for my home, for my friends, my kids. I did in the beginning of my marriage work in the field that I got my degree in. I focused primarily on printmaking, and I actually worked for a printing plate making company.
Cool.
While. And then I stopped working there after my first pregnancy and did some, a small shop on Etsy for a little bit. But after having my daughter, that kind of got put on hold because managing a newborn and a business is a little bit difficult. But I've just continued to use it just in like my personal life and my daily life. It's a good outlet for me.
Oh, that's awesome. I love trying to be creative. It just kind of takes my mind away from whatever else is going on.
Yeah.
Now, you worked with young children for some time. Why do you think you love working with kids so much?
So I always, like with growing up, if you asked me, like, Danielle, what do you want to be when you grow up? I always said I wanted to be a mom. Like from like a elementary school, always said I want to be a mom. So I think that God just really like instilled that in my heart from like an early age before I even had a relationship with him, that like he just called me to loving kids and wanting to be around them and work with them. So when I had opportunity prior to having kids to really like work with children, I jumped on it. I love the like birth through preschool age group. That's like I've tried different ages, and that one's like, that's my sweet spot. Those are the kids that I connect best with, that I feel like I, just am able to work with without even the thinking of it.
Yeah, that's your calling, when you find that sweet spot or the right group of people, they're your people.
Mm-hmm.
And kids are just so amazing, aren't they? They just teach us so much.
Well, and they can learn from such a young age. I think we often we discount the fact that like an infant is constantly learning. That's like their full-time job. When a baby's born, that's all they do. They spend so much of that first year learning. And I think we forget that, those things that they're learning are pretty substantial, like learning how to speak words, how to walk, stuff like that. So if a child is able to learn to speak a language within their first year of life, how are we not like realizing that they can learn so much more than just that we can start teaching them things at birth intentionally, like, of course, to teach them to talk and to walk and to feed themselves and all that stuff. That's like, oh yeah, you do that with a baby. But I think like focusing on teaching children more than just the basic necessities of living is something that's powerful and often forgotten about.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you brought that up because I feel the same way. I don't ever dumb things down for children. And I see a lot of people kind of doing that, not sharing with them, of course, on an age appropriate level,
Right.
but sharing with them new things. And gosh, we're being formed into who God has for us from the time we're born. I think it's wonderful that that's how you worked with kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that you had a miscarriage. Could you share what that experience was like for you?
Yeah. So actually, my first pregnancy was it was actually called an ectopic pregnancy, which is
Okay.
different than a miscarriage. It still results in the loss of the child, but what that is, and it actually only affects 2% of all pregnancies. So it's such like a small chance of it happening, but it did happen, and that's where my first baby implanted in my fallopian tube.
Mm,
Uh, so as the baby grew, we obviously didn't know that that's what had happened, and also there's no doctors still can't figure out what causes that to happen.
right.
Literally something that, like, with all of the advances in medicine we have and the knowledge we have, they still have no idea how this happens, what causes it to happen. However, when it did happen, the baby continued to grow and actually exploded through my fallopian tube.
Wow.
Um, I initially thought I was having a miscarriage.
Hmm.
Similar symptoms, however, much more painful because part of my body had been exploded through.
Wow.
Uh, and, unfortunately, um, by the time we figured out what had happened, the baby was no longer alive. It's something that I had to surgically, they surgically removed our child. And I also lost my fallopian tube that baby had been growing in.
Mm.
And that was tough. And I will
Yeah,
say,
I'm so sorry for your loss. That sounds like a horrible experience.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think, obviously, child loss is not something that women tend to talk about. It's something that most women just suffer in silence, which
Hmm.
is really unfortunate because it's very traumatic on all different levels. I mean, I had that ectopic, and I also later down the line had a miscarriage, both very different, but still very traumatic in their own ways. And I think that um, we don't society doesn't count that as a life.
Mm.
But I had a baby. I saw that
That's right.
baby on the screen. That baby lived inside of me for 8 weeks. And, I know, especially like a lot of women wait for the first 12 weeks to go before they even like announce that they're pregnant for fear of loss. But, that baby from the point of conception is like the hair color, the eye color, the gender, all of that is already decided. Scientifically, they prove that. So
Right.
that's not even impacting what we know as believers, that God has clearly knit together these children before we've even conceived. But so my child, that first child, lived for 8 weeks,
Mm.
and um, I still, the day that I lost that baby is a day that every year is still painful for me. That's 4 years ago. And I even, the due date of that baby, every year that comes around, I think of, would that baby have come on their due date? Would I have had to have been induced? How would that labor have gone? Um, I would have a 4.5-year-old right now.
Wow.
And so it really does make such an impact on your life when you experience a loss like that. Um, but unfortunately, like I said, that impact is often a secret impact that you walk with, but is never shared or really spoken about or honored.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing today, because I think you're going to connect with some listeners and really powerfully impact them and make them understand some things or feel like they're not alone, connect with you. And it is important. And thank you also for just defining the difference in what you went through, so that those of us that don't know could be educated. I appreciate that a lot. And again, I am just so sorry that you had to go through that. You have this strong emotional connection, even with a person, in just a couple of days, let alone someone who's growing inside your body. And, you're, like you said, seeing pictures of them and dreaming about when they're going to be born. And I am sorry that every year that's something that you have to kind of relive.
Thank you. Yeah.
When you had your first child, I'm sure in many senses, after discussing all that, it was such a relief. But did you carry any anxiety during that pregnancy?
Oh, yeah. So I had my ectopic in January of 2017. Mm-hmm. And I found out that I was pregnant with my daughter in May of 2017. So it was only a few short months between the loss and the news that we had conceived again. And I mean, wow. When you go through any type of trauma and you're put in a similar situation, instantly your mind goes back to that trauma. So I, every bit of that pregnancy had anxiety every single day. Some days were worse than others, but every single day there was a level of anxiety. And I had been seeing a counselor mm-hmm. during that time, because obviously when you go through a traumatic loss and you work with babies and children, it's very triggering. So it was definitely a difficult pregnancy, because it was so close, and everything was so fresh. There was that constant fear of, will it happen again? Because with an ectopic pregnancy, miscarriage can happen to any woman. It has it touches almost every woman's life. Not all, but many suffer mm-hmm. miscarriages. But like I said before, the ectopic pregnancies happen to 2% of all pregnancies. And however, once you have one ectopic pregnancy, you are considered high risk for a repeat.
Wow.
For every single pregnancy thereafter. So I was, my pregnancy with my daughter was a high risk pregnancy because they needed to make sure that it didn't happen again. But, luckily, thank God, my daughter was born safe and healthy. She was not ectopic. She was in the right area to grow. And so super blessed. But yeah, it was definitely a very difficult pregnancy emotionally and mentally.
Wow. I can't even imagine what that was like in such a short amount of time. I'm so glad that you had the foresight to see a counselor. And would you suggest that if anybody else found themselves in your position, I mean, certainly when you're then prone to having it again, it must have just been a scary time. Would you suggest that if someone were to be dealing with loss, that they would get themselves counseling?
Absolutely. There seems to be like a stigma that you're weak or, there's shame in getting help. But I don't know if I would have been able to survive without counseling. I mean, it was difficult, and anxiety, for those who suffer with anxiety, I mean, it consumes your body. You have a physical response. And I needed to have that person that I could talk through all my feelings with, who, and you can do that with friends and families, but having someone who's, it's their job. They've been trained to do this. They've been trained to work with
Right.
trauma, with, different mental disorders. They are equipped to give you exactly what you need. So I would suggest to anybody going through any type of trauma, any type of mental struggle, to get that help, because it really makes such a positive impact on your life and can just improve it so much.
Well, that's good advice. Um, I mean, my daughter is a psychotherapist and she specializes in trauma, and she can't obviously talk to me about the cases, but I just know how many people she has coming for those reasons. And I know that somebody who has an education and can help you kind of with a tool belt and different things that you can do when you find yourself in the midst of that anxiety is just paramount.
Yes.
Um, Tell me about your daughter, your first child. Like, what was it like being a mother when you finally were a mom?
So God is funny in the way he works. So my daughter, I said that my ectopic was January of 2017. My daughter was born in January of 2018. The dates are actually 3 days apart and
Wow.
her due date was actually like the day that it happened. So, God has really eased the pain with that, where, within the span of 1 week, I do remember that loss, but I also celebrate a life. And my daughter is my husband through and like me. I'll say that she looks like me. There's a picture of me and my uncle on my refrigerator.
Hmm.
And right around I was the age that she is now, and like if you point to the picture and ask who that is, she says it's her. So she looks like me, but she is her father through and through, and which is
Is that
great.
a good thing?
Yeah, great
Okay.
thing. So she's super outgoing. She's so smart, so smart. She like amazes me every day with like the things she does and she says, and she's fearless. Now some of those things cause some tension between her and I, because I'm with her every day, and when she's climbing up the blanket ladder and jumping off of it, I'm not thrilled about that. But it's been such a blessing to have her. She definitely is independent, not like a snuggly baby, which is interesting because my love language is physical touch. Hers, um, so, but it's been such a joy to have her. But it's definitely been like a really rough transition. You can prepare all you want, but until you actually have that baby in your hands, like you really don't know how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And I said, my passion since I was in elementary school was to be a mom. So like clearly that's a goal that I had for most of my life. But when it actually happens, it's a really big difference. It really changes every aspect of your life.
It does. I remember saying to somebody trying to explain the difference, and I said, I can remember who I was before, but it's almost kind of like the difference between 3D and two-dimensional. Like, but I can't feel that way anymore because now I'm a mom.
Right. Hmm. Absolutely. It's like I tell my husband often, I can't remember, like, I know there was a time before her, but
Yeah.
it feels like she's always been here.
Yeah.
So it's
Wow.
very much like, I can look back at pictures of things I used to do and who I used to be, but she is so much a part of my life that like that's all my body knows now is
Yeah.
like you have a child and like you forget everything that happened before and now it's just life with that kid.
That's right. And then you get that mama bear stuff where There's all these things just kick in that you didn't have before.
Right.
So did you want to have more children?
Yeah. So early on, like when my husband and I were dating, we talked about, 2 to 4 kids. Then, like I said, you have one. You make all these plans in your head, and then you actually like start seeing some fruition of that. And after we had my daughter, I honestly, for the first 3 months, I was like, you know what, maybe we just have one. It's difficult. And my husband at the time was working full time and in school full time. So, and then, obviously we added a newborn to that. So life was super, super hectic for us. And I just had this moment of, I think maybe I'm okay with one. Now with my daughter was born by C-section. She was breech. So there was no other option. I mean, they have the option of like trying to turn her, but that's like a 1% chance and apparently very painful. And I was like,
no, thank you.
I'll just, I definitely did not want originally, like in my perfect world, like the plans that I made, I didn't want a C-section. But that's the way that God wanted her born. That's the way she was born. And with a C-section, they very strongly suggest not conceiving for at least a year so that your body has time to heal. And given the trauma that my body had gone through with that topic, that was a year before I had surgery. And then a year later, I took that very, very seriously. So even though at 3 months, I was like, I don't think we're going to have any more. I was like, you know what? I'm going to wait this year. And once the year is up, then we can make the decision on whether or not we want to expand our family. And as my daughter grew and her personality started to show, and like I said, she is fiercely independent, but she's also not made to be an only child.
Yeah.
It's not in her personality. She loves being around people. She loves, like God created all of us to be in community. But I think there are certain people who like, they really, really thrive. They need it. And she needs more than just my husband and I. So after she was a year old, we had decided at that point that we were going to try to have another baby.
So you did. And when you learned that you were pregnant again, it happened to be during a pandemic. So how is it experiencing the stages of pregnancy during quarantine life?
Yeah. So, so with my son, like I said, my daughter at a year old, we decided to start trying, and it actually took a full year to get pregnant with my son. Within that year, we did have a miscarriage, which was very difficult. And with my daughter, with my first 2 pregnancies, we got pregnant like within the first month of trying. So it happened super easy. And then, with my son, that wasn't the case, which was very difficult because, after that year, I'd been like, yeah, I need to have my daughter have somebody to play with. And then you have that desire and you want that for your child, and you put that pressure on yourself of like, to make this happen when clearly there's nothing that we can do. Like my husband and I can try to make that baby, but we don't actually have the power to make that happen. So it was a really difficult year of trying to conceive. And when we finally did, it was awesome. We were super excited. And then, like you said, the pandemic hit. And that definitely made things difficult. It was very isolating. Like my appointments, my husband could not join me for any of them.
Wow.
Obviously in the beginning stages of my pregnancy, it was right before the pandemic. So we had found out we were pregnant in October of 2019. And like I said previously with ectopic, every time I get pregnant, it's high risk. So they actually bring me in at like 5-6 weeks pregnant, to make sure that the baby has implanted in the correct place.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for the most part, a lot of women don't see the doctor for the first time until like 10-12 weeks. So, everything was great. He was in the right place. They actually like pushed my due date further. They said, I thought I was 6 weeks pregnant. They told me I was 4 weeks pregnant. And I was like, well, that's your opinion. The baby will come when the baby comes. So, like the first handful of appointments, my husband was able to come. But then when, like everything got shut down, it was just me. And, they had no information on how it affected pregnant women, born children. There was like no data. Obviously, everything was so new. They were still trying to figure out, what would help slow the transmission. And so it was very isolating. I was, I was in the house for most of the time, but every time I would go to the grocery store, there's that fear of like, there's this sickness going around and they don't know like what is going on with it, how to stop it. There's not really much you can do with it. Some people are, like it's fatal for a large group of people. Some people don't even know they have it. So like it was a very difficult time with like fear and anxiety. And that also played into, even though I had a successful pregnancy with my daughter, there's still that those traumatic flashbacks of, my first pregnancy. And so I had the fear and the stress and anxiety of a global pandemic wrapped up with the fear and stress and anxiety of past birth trauma. So it was draining. And like I said, very lonely because we were all stuck in the house. So I spent most of my pregnancy, the last parts where, like people would obviously notice that you're pregnant, alone in my home. And that made things really, really difficult because I had waited for so long to have this baby, tried for a year, and like was so excited. And then it was kind of like everything was behind closed doors and not celebrated like I kind of hoped that it would be.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a baby, you get to wear cute baby things, you get to talk to people about the baby, you get to have baby showers, and all that stuff was taken away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry about that, but he did come. And could you tell us a little bit about when you had your second child, how did being a mother change with two little ones around? Like, was it what you expected?
It definitely was somewhat what I expected, if that makes sense. So I had a repeat C-section with my son, and it was elective. I did go into labor early because even though the doctors said that I was due a week after, I knew my dates. So I went into labor early. I was in labor for about 30 hours and said, I just want to do the C-section again. And I do want to take a moment to just say, because I know there's also a big stigma around like whether you deliver quote unquote naturally or by C-section, like all birth is birth and all birth is natural.
Amen. I had a C-section the first time around. You still have a baby. It's not your, it's the what's best for your situation.
Yep. If this was the 1950s, which isn't that long ago, like not that long ago at all. One, I would have died with my ectopic because they wouldn't have been able to help me. But with like C-section, like all of that, my children would not have been able to have successfully been born into this world. All birth, no matter how it happens, is birth, and not one is better than the other.
I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah.
I really am. I don't understand, who are these people that sit around and start judging everything? Like, where do they come from? What are they doing all day? Like, there's so many people that tell you got to do this, you got to do that. I mean, now there's these new kids telling us like we have to part our hair in the middle and we can't wear skinny jeans anymore. Like, what?
Oh, I heard that and I was like, I was like, whatever, you children.
It just
Oh,
seems like there's always somebody making a stigma about
yeah.
something. So I'm
Yeah.
really glad that you shared that, because you're right.
hmm So obviously with a C-section, it's a different sort of recovery because it is more of a major surgery. So you have a little bit more, it takes a little longer to be able to like move around and, you know, I was only allowed to lift my son, which made it difficult for my daughter.
Yeah.
She didn't quite understand. She was 2.5 at that point, which by the way, like I said, she's not a snuggly kid, but like she wanted to like sit with me and stuff like that, which I couldn't do. So that made it really difficult because I wanted so badly to, I didn't want my daughter to think that I didn't, you know, that I didn't want her, I didn't love her. It was something that I physically just couldn't do. And then my daughter like was an amazing sleeper. Straight home from the hospital, like slept 8 hours a night. And I know that that's not typical. I'm sure a lot of moms are like, well, aren't you lucky? Well, guys, my son was not that way. Um, my son was, you know, like every 2 hours, like clockwork. He had terrible, terrible reflux, which for people who don't know, that just causes him, he threw up almost everything.
No.
Uh, Everything. We tried breastfeeding and it just wasn't uh the breast milk wasn't thick enough to try to keep down. We were trying everything we could to keep what we were feeding him in his stomach. Um, so we had to try a formula that was super, super thick, just like a whole bunch of stuff. So my son took a lot more effort than my daughter did, which
Hmm.
and then you have a 2.5-year-old adjusting to not being the only child, and you know wrap that all into a pandemic where you can't like just hang out at a park, you can't go for play dates, you can't send her um, over to a friend's house for a little bit. So it was like a really huge learning curve for us because I ignorantly assumed that my son would be just like my daughter. And
Hmm.
that was not the case. As is, obviously with most babies, every baby is very different, just like every single person is different. Um, so it was a very big learning curve for us to learn how to care um, for the needs of my son, as well as to nurture my daughter and try to balance the time spent between the two of them.
Yeah. So you had so many hurdles,
Mm.
so many things that were traumatic or difficult or isolating. And when we had talked before the interview, you had said that along the way, you realized that you had postpartum depression. So I was hoping you would share with the listeners, like, what did you do once you realized it? How did you seek help? What would you say to anyone listening that might think that they have postpartum depression? And were there things that, signs and symptoms, or things maybe you didn't know about?
Yeah. So with my daughter, my husband was working full time, school full time. Obviously, it's a huge life change to go from just married to um, a parent of a child. And while she was a great sleeper and a relatively easy baby, I really struggled, and I just assumed that it was because we had a lot going on in life. There was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
chaos. It was really busy. You're not getting any sleep, things just shift. So I just kind of like pushed it away as, well, once my husband's done school, things will go back to normal. Or once she's out of this stage, things will go back to normal. And it didn't. Then as I was trying to get pregnant with my son, that kind of was, it was still in the background, but it was replaced with this consuming desire to have another baby. And so that became the focus of my life at that point. But there was still this little like chaos in the background that I couldn't quite figure out. And I think with postpartum depression, it again is something that has a huge stigma. So many suffer from it, so many. However, if you speak out that you're suffering with it, you're instantly like labeled as a risk to your child or like to yourself. And that's not the case. There's so many different facets of postpartum depression. And there's not even just like, it's not even just postpartum depression. There's postpartum anxiety and postpartum rage. And I actually suffer from all three of them.
Wow. Could you tell us about that? I never heard of that before.
Yeah. So with postpartum anxiety, a lot of that is wrapped into worrying that something's going to happen to your baby. And that obviously I can see the root of that from my first pregnancy and the trauma from that. So that kind of carried through. And so I had that never really left. So I had that anxiety after my ectopic. I carried that into my pregnancy with my daughter. I carried that through her first years of life. And to be honest, I still struggle. It's my postpartum anxiety hasn't been removed from my daughter to my son. It's both of them. So I still struggle with that anxiety of wondering, like, is my child going to be safe? Is someone going to take my child? Is something going to happen in the middle of the night? All of those things. Postpartum rage is just inexplicable, like anger for no reason. I mean, the littlest things, and this happened after I gave birth to my son. I think part of it is because I did not address the issues or put a name to them prior to get the pregnancy with my son. I had stopped seeing the counselor after I had my daughter. There was chaos. Then there was desire for another kid. Then you get pregnant in a pandemic, and there that, I still had that depression, that anxiety, and then spending all that time just stuck in the house, just had it growing and growing and growing. And it wasn't until I had my son and it was the postpartum rage that really, really had me start thinking. Because I was like, this is not who this isn't who I am. Why am I reacting this way to my 2-year-old? Like,
yeah,
now she's asking for a drink of milk and I'm like flying off the handle as if she like did something horrible. And that's when I really started kind of like researching and looking into like, okay, so this is what I'm experiencing. Let me name it. And so like, obviously I could say, oh yeah, the postpartum depression, definitely have that. Postpartum anxiety. And then when I saw the postpartum rage, I was like, it's crazy that I've never heard of this before, because it's clearly something that's been around. And like, if I haven't heard of it, then how would I even have the tools to figure out how to get help? And that's a major issue that we have these days, is that we don't talk about these things. And it does not make me a bad mom to struggle. That's right. It doesn't make me a bad person, but by not discussing it and not having that information out there, it prevents me from getting the help that I need. And I saw like, okay, all these things are happening. Clearly it wasn't, the chaos of the first time having a baby. So I need to get help. I need to figure this out. Through my research, I found out for anyone struggling with any of these postpartum issues, it can happen the day after you give birth. It can happen up to 2 years after you give birth. So if I was already struggling from the ectopic, if that's when the onset happened, and then I'm adding births onto that, I'm adding the years that this could happen, and clearly I'm predisposed. I know that not every woman does suffer with these issues. However, more often than not, I found that most women do. But again, there's like a shame and a stigma and a guilt that if you
Mm-hmm.
struggle with this, then you're a bad mom and you don't deserve to have a baby, or you're going to hurt your baby. And that's not it at all. So women who are struggling, if you think even a hint of, oh, I think I might struggle with one of these, get help, reach out to someone, because having postpartum depression doesn't mean you're going to try to kill yourself or your baby. For some women, there is suicidal thoughts. For some women, there are harmful thoughts. That's not all postpartum depression is. Postpartum depression is it's depression. It's depression that has come at the onset of a birth. So not every person that struggles with regular depression has those suicidal thoughts or has those harmful thoughts.
Right.
But unfortunately, that's the tagline that's been put on it, that if you have postpartum depression, you're going to hurt yourself or hurt your baby. And that isn't always the case. And I think that we as a society need to, instead of looking down upon women who are struggling, when someone has a baby, instead of like, okay, during pregnancy, it's all about the mom, how you feeling, like all of that. But then the baby comes and it's all about the baby. We as a
Yeah.
society need to focus on the mother and say, how are you doing? And not like, oh, I'm good, fine, thanks. No, you need to say like, are you struggling anyway? How is your mental health? What can I do to help you in this season? Because so many women struggle with it, and so many women are afraid to reach out and ask for help. And if we started as a society, just as women, asking other women, hey,
Yeah.
how can I be there for you during this time? In what ways are you struggling? We could break this cycle of women suffering in silence.
That's powerful. That is so powerful. And I am so glad that you shared that. You're right. You're absolutely right. And for you to be vulnerable and share what you've gone through and make some of these points, you could be changing the trajectory of someone else's life.
Mm-hmm.
So you're a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And you've gone through all these difficult times, and your husband's a Christian as well. Like, were you able to share with him, how did your faith play a role in all these times? I know you have like a mentor helping you right now, spending time with you through this, and you have Christian friendships and community. Like, how is that all a key to your healing?
Yeah, I don't know how people go through this kind of stuff without God. I mean, obviously I know that they do, but like, he was the one that I was crying out through. Like, all of the seasons, all of the different trauma, everything I went through, he was the one that I was calling out to. Obviously, my husband was walking on this journey with me, and he was crying out to the Lord as well.
Yeah.
When we lost our first baby, when I was pregnant again, like he also felt those same fears that I felt, because, like, physically I was the one that went through the traumatic loss, but he lost a child as well.
Yeah.
And so for him, he was crying out to the Lord, and like crying out to the Lord on my behalf, asking God to heal me and to help me. And he still does, because I do still need healing. I do need help. When I did put a name to what I was struggling with, the first thing I did was I need somebody to walk alongside of me. I need somebody who can help me in this season. And I connected with a woman who also suffered with postpartum depression when she had her children. So she was able to understand the things that I was saying. And it felt so good to be understood and to feel heard. She also is a believer. So I had another layer of another person praying for me, another person going to God on my behalf and fighting for me. And it's just like, it's made such a positive impact on my life. I was living in darkness. And I was willfully living in darkness because I was so ashamed and I didn't want anybody to know. And it wasn't
Yeah.
until God really was pushing me, saying, like, you can't do this. You can't stay here. This isn't where I have you. It does no good for you, for your family, for anyone else. And he just kept pushing me and pushing me and pushing me until I took that step of obedience and said, okay, I'm going to get help. I'm going to start sharing with, a few people who I feel really safe with, who I know love me and want to come alongside me and fight with me in this battle, because that's what I need. We were made for community. We were made to be with other people. And, with the pandemic, unfortunately, we can't do that in a normal capacity, but there is still opportunity to do that. You just have to alter the way you are in community.
That's right.
Through church, I'm in a community group. And we've created our own little bubble, and it is families in the same stage of life as us. So kids same age, and it just allows me to find that rest and that encouragement that I was lacking. So it's been a huge help in my recovery. And I know that this is a recovery that's going to take a while. It's something that just because I start talking to somebody about it means that it instantly goes away. And listen, God has the complete power to remove it from me. He could snap his fingers and I could be free of the postpartum depression, anxiety, and rage. However, I know that his plans are for good.
That's right.
Even though it may be difficult or painful for me right now, there's a good purpose for it. So I've just got to trust that if he's a good God and he has good for me, that this season is for a very specific purpose, and that, eventually I will be freed from it. But right now I need to be obedient within this season and do things that he's asking me to do. So it's definitely, I like I said a few seconds ago, like I don't know how people do hard things without God, because I would fall apart.
Well, it's so comforting to know that the one who knows you perfectly has a plan, and he is part of what's happening, and he is directing your healing at a rate that you can handle. And he's obviously, from what you just said, given you so many different layers of things to help you. And your obedience is key. Your obedience to trusting that he knows best.
Yeah.
And part of that, you had shared with me, you recently made a tough decision to leave your job in obedience to God. Yeah. I think that's part of all of this. Like, would you be able to tell us, like, how did you come to take that step?
Yeah. I've been feeling it for a while. I felt God nudging me that my time was up. I've been at my job for 10 years. Love it. Love my job. I genuinely enjoyed it. It was great. It was part-time, so I was still able to be a stay-at-home mom, but also work this job. And he just continuously kept kind of poking at me and saying, this is not where I have you. You're not supposed to be here. And it's really hard when there's something positive in your life that God's telling you to walk away from, because that doesn't make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Would you leave a good thing? There was no, issues. I genuinely enjoyed what I did. And I would say the past 6 months, God really has been pushing hard. Really heavily weighing on me, and to the point where I couldn't get away from it. And this is really silly, but so my daughter, 3 years old, loves Frozen 2 to be specific. And by the way, Frozen 2 is
way better.
Way better. Just phenomenal. And there are 2 songs that, because with a 3-year-old, you clearly watch the same movie all day, every day for months on end. And there were 2 songs because I, was kind of pushing God away. I didn't want to do what he was asking me to do because I love my job. And the first one is the Into the Unknown. And every time I would hear that song, God would be like, I'm asking you to go into the unknown. And I was like, God, this is a Disney movie. You're not speaking through. And he kept saying it, and I was like, nope, not this is just silly. And then towards the end, there's a song that she sings called Show Yourself. And, he kept pushing me in that, like, hey, I'm trying to show you who you're supposed to be, who I want you to be. I'm trying to help you find yourself, because I have felt lost.
Yeah.
I have a degree in art. I'm passionate about that. My Etsy shop was relatively successful, and I had to stop doing that when I gave birth to my daughter. And I was fine with that, but I realized that, like, God wants me to use my creativity. And I just haven't found, like, a balance in that over the past couple of years. And so, watching these kids movies, and God's like, I'm trying to show you what I have for you, who you're supposed to be. I'm trying to, like, answer the questions that you've been asking me, but you're not listening. So I'm talking to you through a Disney movie. And I remember there was one point, you also listen to the soundtrack in the car every time you drive. So there was one point we're driving, and we're listening to the songs, and I just start crying, because I know God saying, I'm asking you to do this. You're not listening to me in all the other ways that I've been trying to talk to you. So I'm going to talk to you through this, because you can't get away from it, because your daughter won't let you. So I'm asking you to follow me into unknown territory, so I can show you who I'm trying to have you be, who I've meant you to be. And you've been asking me these questions, and I keep trying to answer them, but you're not listening. So after that, I talked to my husband. I talked to the woman who was mentoring me. I talked to a really close friend who's walked through this with me. And, through a lot of prayer, I finally relented, and I said, okay, I'm going to be obedient, even though it makes me sad. It's not what I want to do. I was holding on to my job with, like, white knuckles, and God was like, you need to let it go. So there's another Frozen song.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's another Frozen song.
But I had to. And so I stepped out in obedience. And I decided to, resign from my job, which was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Absolutely heartbreaking. But God has shown such favor since. Like, I decide to resign from my job, my husband gets a raise at work. Like,
so go God. He is so awesome.
I'm removing, because I'm like, oh God, that's some finances. Not that I was making, like, I wasn't making a ton of money, and I was working part-time, but God was like, look, you did something I asked you to do, and I'm going to bless your family through your obedience. And so I was like, all right, made the decision, and I had instant peace.
Yeah.
Instant peace that I had made the right decision.
And at the time, you had just started doing a new creative pursuit that you were just kind of playing around with, and that started to get blessed too, didn't it?
Yeah. So I had seen, following different people on social media, I'd seen this, like, one cool, it was like a resin letter set, and that someone had posted. And so I went on to see, and it was, like, way out of my price range. But my sister has an Etsy shop that she does cool things with resin. And so I was like, hey, could you make a set of these for my daughter for Christmas? She was like, absolutely. And then I also have a niece, and I said, oh, can I pay you to make a set for my niece as well? She said, yeah. And I was like, oh, you should totally sell, like, this person's selling it for this amount of money. You should totally do it. You can make lots of money. So initially I was encouraging my sister to do it because she already had an established business. However, she was, I talked to her a couple of times, and she was like, I have a very specific market of people, and this does not, like, it's not something that they're interested in. And so she had, like, flippantly said, like, you should just do it. And I was like, I don't know about that. I have to be able to create something that, like, I can manage well while trying to raise my kids. So we were going on a little family vacation, and she's like, "How about this? I'll teach you. I'll teach you how to do it, because resin work is very scientific, very specific. Like, um, there's a huge creative aspect to it, but like the actual like mixing and whatnot, like you have to be very sure about what you're doing. It's a chemical process. So we went away. She taught me how to do it, and we made a couple sets of these letters, and I told her, I'm gonna try to sell them for cheaper than I had seen, because I was like, that's a price point that I can't hit. But talked to my sister, we figured out like how much it actually costs. And I said, I'm going to try to sell these. And clearly I used her supply. So I was like, I'll give you, the money if I sell them, but I just kind of want to see like if people would be interested. So, I started putting them on Instagram, and instantly they started selling.
Wow.
People were asking if I'd like made custom sets, stuff like that. And I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. Like I kind of said to God, oh, if I sell some, then I'll start this. Then I'll start this business. Like kind of throwing out the fleeces.
Mm-hmm.
And so then there's an account I follow, and it's like a maker account, and there's like a storefront, but she also runs like a whole bunch of like, I don't want to call them a craft show, because it's a maker show. Like that's what
Right.
she calls them, markets, like maker markets. And she does like virtual because of the pandemic, but also some in person when we're allowed. And so one was coming up, and I was like, all right, I'm going to apply for this. I don't have a website. I barely have like anything posted on Instagram. God, there's no way she's going to accept me. But if she does, then that means that this is what she wants for me. And all of this is happening while I'm like wrestling on whether or not I should leave my job. And don't you know, I get accepted. And I'm like, oh man, well, clearly, God, I keep putting these tasks before you, saying, well, if this, then this. And every single time I put this out for you, you fulfill it. And I know I'm sitting here going, okay, so I can't do both. I can't, well, all three. I can't be a mom, a stay-at-home mom. I can't work my current job and start this new business. I know that you want me to leave my job, but financially, I'm afraid of the impact that it has on my family. And my husband and I are very, very conscious about finances. We live within our means, budget. Like we are very, very focused on making sure that we are wise with the money we have, so we can bless others. And just like, live a life that we can model for our children. So I was like, man, we're taking this financial hit, and he did get a raise, but like, I really would prefer to be able to like have some sort of like financial impact for my family. And literally like every single time I asked God for something, he gave it to me. And so I just had to kind of say, all right, God, I've asked you for favor in this, and you continuously give it to me. So I'm going to step out, and I'm going to try to make this a business. So I did.
That is so awesome. And I'm going to include your Instagram info for the business in the show notes. If you're listening to this, go check that out. Yeah. It's a really awesome.
Thank you. And actually, any of your listeners, if they, let's say gratitude, if they message me and say gratitude, I'll give them a $5 discount on any of their purchases over $20.
Awesome.
So just say gratitude.
Okay, gratitude. Hashtag gratitude. That's awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. That's great. I want to ask you just one last question, and I had a couple more, but this is the one that keeps sticking out to me as what I think should be a good final question. So first of all, I've really enjoyed this time so much, and I really appreciate your being brave and vulnerable. If you could give any advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I would definitely tell myself to give myself more grace, but also to give others more grace. I've been through so many things in the past couple of years that I never would have seen coming, ever. And I know I'm not the first woman to experience all those different layers of trauma, and loss and mental health issues. And I would tell my younger self to start advocating for women earlier, to
Wow.
start reaching out to moms. I was afraid, I wanted to be a mom. I've always had this passion to, impact and minister to other moms. And I started doing it before I had any kids of my own, but there was a timidness of like, well, I'm not a mom, so how can I impact other moms? And I would say, do it.
Yeah.
You are not, just because you aren't physically a mother, you're not raising any children, doesn't mean that you can't make an impact for other mothers, because moms need a lot. They need support, they need encouragement, they need love, they need people fighting for them and walking alongside them. And I wish I would have started it sooner.
Yeah, that's right. That is, it's just like I'm hearing you talk and like seems a big part of your calling.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. I just, moms have a really hard job.
Yeah, they do.
And they need the support. And they also, a lot of women walk into motherhood without, it's impossible to know how it'll affect you.
Yeah.
I didn't know how it would affect me. And while you can do some preparations, you really can't prepare yourself. But I wish I would have looked into things more about, like, obviously I knew postpartum depression existed, but I wish I would have actually started my research then so that I could have identified it sooner. There's everybody can look back on their life and say, oh, if I would have done this, then it could have been better. God obviously has a very big plan for my life. He has a big plan for everyone's life. And part of his plan was allowing me to walk through all of this.
Yeah.
And even though it doesn't necessarily make sense, or maybe I'm not seeing the outcome yet, I know that there's a very good reason why I've been on this path that he set before me. So I'm going to try obediently to follow it. And, I just, if I can help one person, it makes it worth it.
That's right. And I mean, as somebody who's struggled with different things and different traumas, I can say that I called on God in a different way during that time. My relationship with him grew and deepened, but he has now used those times for me to bridge to other people and have moments where I can be there for someone who feels all alone. Mm-hmm. And I know that that's definitely something that he has for you, because you're already sharing, and it's just exceptional, and we're grateful.
Oh, thank you so much.
So thank you so much for having joined us today. And again, like I said, for sharing and talking about a subject that needs to be discussed more. I wish you all the best and can't wait to see what God has for you.
Thanks.
Hey, bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, so I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I want to challenge you to go out today and to just take notice and to stop and really look around and find at least one good thing, one thing to be thankful for. If you do that today, you're going to find so many more things tomorrow without even trying. Because once you start, you begin to see what's always been there. And if you need a refill, you can come join me again for another cup. Make sure to subscribe and have an awesome day, and go be grateful.